people were granted full citizenship. The text is direct and clear. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. For more than a century, this language has been interpreted to include the children of immigrants, whether they are in the country legally or not. This interpretation was solidified by a landmark Supreme Court case in 1898. That case, United States v. Wong Kim Ark, affirmed that a child born in San Francisco to Chinese parents who were not U.S. citizens was, in fact, an American citizen. The court decided that the phrase "subject to the jurisdiction thereof" meant that the person was under the protection and laws of the United States. The only exceptions were for children of foreign diplomats or enemy soldiers occupying U.S. territory, as those individuals remain under the jurisdiction of their own governments. This ruling has served as the key legal precedent for birthright citizenship for 127 years, shaping the diverse fabric of American society by guaranteeing citizenship to all born within its borders. For generations, this understanding of the 14th Amendment has been accepted by both major political parties and has been the basis of U.S. citizenship law. It ensures that there is no hereditary, multi-generational underclass of non-citizens living within the country. The principle reinforces the idea that an individual's allegiance is to the nation where they are born, and that everyone born in the U.S. has the same rights and responsibilities. This long-standing tradition is now facing one of its most significant challenges, leading to a national debate about the very meaning of American citizenship and who is entitled to it. On January 20, 2025, President Donald Trump took a bold step to challenge the established understanding of birthright citizenship. He signed an executive order aimed at changing the rules for who automatically becomes a citizen at birth. The order states that children born in the United States to parents who are not U.S. citizens and are not lawful permanent residents will no longer be granted automatic citizenship. This policy specifically targets the children of undocumented immigrants, as well as those whose parents are in the country on temporary visas, such as students or tourists. The order represented a direct attempt to redefine one of the most fundamental aspects of American law through executive action. The Trump administration's legal argument centers on a reinterpretation of the 14th Amendment's phrase, "subject to the jurisdiction thereof." The executive order claims that parents who are in the country without legal permission are not fully subject to U.S. jurisdiction because they owe allegiance to a foreign government. Therefore, the administration argues, their children should not be entitled to automatic citizenship. This position directly contradicts the 1898 Wong Kim Ark ruling, which established a much broader definition of jurisdiction. The order set the stage for a major legal battle, pitting the power of the president against more than a century of judicial precedent. Immediately after the executive order was issued, legal challenges were filed across the country. Civil liberties groups and state attorneys general argued that the president did not have the authority to change the Constitution with the stroke of a pen. They said that only a constitutional amendment or a new Supreme Court ruling could alter the meaning of the 14th Amendment. In response to these lawsuits, several federal district judges issued nationwide injunctions. These court orders temporarily blocked the executive order from being enforced anywhere in the country while the legal cases proceeded, protecting the citizenship status of children born to non-citizen parents during the legal fight. The use of these nationwide injunctions became a central point of conflict in the legal battle. The Trump administration argued that these broad orders were an overreach of judicial power, allowing a single judge to set policy for the entire nation. This procedural argument eventually brought the case to the Supreme Court, even before the justices could rule on the main question of whether the executive order itself was constitutional. The focus shifted from the core issue of birthright citizenship to a debate over the proper role and power of federal courts in checking a president's actions, setting the stage for a landmark decision. Policy, which is not their intended role. The ruling effectively overturned the nationwide injunctions that had blocked the executive order. This meant the policy could take effect in states that had not filed a lawsuit, while remaining blocked in states like Maryland, Massachusetts, and Washington, where the legal challenges originated. In a powerful dissent, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, argued that the majority's decision seriously weakens the power of the courts to protect the rights of Americans. She wrote that the ruling creates a dangerous situation where a president could enforce an unconstitutional policy against anyone who has not had the time or resources to sue the government. Justice Jackson called the decision an existential threat to the rule of law, suggesting it allows the executive branch to operate with fewer checks on its power. Her dissent, along with those of Justices Sotomayor and Kagan, warned that this could lead to widespread violations of constitutional rights. The immediate effect of the ruling is significant. It creates a complex and confusing patchwork of citizenship rules across the United States. A child's citizenship status could now depend on the state in which they are born. In a state that is part of a lawsuit with an injunction, a child born to undocumented parents would still be considered a citizen. However, in a state not covered by an injunction, that same child would not be. This fractured legal landscape introduces profound uncertainty for thousands of families and sets the stage for further legal and political battles over this deeply divisive issue. The Supreme Court's decision has now facing the difficult task of determining a newborn citizenship status, a role they have never had to play before. In response to this new legal reality, immigrant rights organizations and civil liberties groups are already planning their next steps. The American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, and other groups have announced their intention to file new lawsuits, including class action lawsuits, to try and protect larger groups of people from the executive order. The goal of these new cases would be to seek protection for all individuals in a similar situation, not just those named in a specific lawsuit. However, Justice Barrett's majority opinion signaled that the court might be skeptical of attempts to use class actions as a way to get around the new limits on nationwide injunctions. The ultimate question of whether President Trump's executive order is constitutional remains unanswered. The Supreme Court has already agreed to hear a direct challenge to the order itself, with arguments scheduled for October 2025. That future case will finally force the justices to confront the core issue, the meaning of the 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause. The court will have to decide whether to uphold the 127-year-old precedent of Wong Kim Ark or to embrace the new, narrower interpretation of citizenship advanced by the Trump administration. The outcome of that case will have far-reaching consequences for the future of American society. For now, the country is left in a period of legal and political limbo. President Trump has celebrated the recent ruling as a victory for presidential authority, while his opponents have condemned it as an attack on the Constitution. The patchwork of citizenship rules will likely remain in place until the Supreme Court rules on the main issue later this year. Until then,
hello my YouTube family, thank you so much for watching this video. And personally, I am so happy Iran versus Israel finally ceasefire for except for Iran. Thank you so much for United States of America. Thank you so much for Donald Trump. Full video was watch and full details provide this video. Thank you so much for watching, support and subscribe this YouTube channel. Thank you so much guys.
United States. It was a delicate balancing act, designed to salvage national pride while acknowledging a painful military reality. The Iranian response was not limited to rhetoric. In a grim and widely publicized act of retaliation, the regime announced the execution of 3 individuals accused of being Israeli spies. This brought the total number of alleged spies executed during the brief but intense conflict to 6. These actions were clearly intended as a signal of internal resolve and a warning to any domestic opposition or foreign intelligence networks operating within the country. By demonstrating its willingness to take lethal action against perceived internal threats, the Iranian government sought to project an aura of control and ruthlessness. ensuring that the narrative of national unity and defiance was not undermined from within its own borders. Ultimately, the Iranian government's public posture was a masterclass in political stagecraft, aimed at transforming a significant military setback into a symbolic political triumph. By focusing on the survival of the regime and the nation's ability to endure the attack, President Pezeshkian and his government attempted to rewrite the story from one of destruction to one of resilience. They claim to have successfully stared down the Great Satan and its regional ally, and in doing so, had secured a ceasefire that implicitly recognized Iran's position as a major regional power. For the average Iranian citizen, bombarded with state-controlled media, the message was clear: Iran had suffered, but it had not been broken. Section 5. An international chessboard. Global powers react. The American airstrikes on Iran, well, they sent immediate shockwaves through the international community, didn't they? Global and regional powers were, forced to recalibrate their positions on the volatile chessboard of Middle Eastern politics. The responses varied widely, reflecting a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and economic interests. In Europe, there was this sense of cautious approval from key American allies. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was quick to praise President Trump's actions, commending both the decisive action taken to address the Iranian nuclear threat and the subsequent diplomatic effort to broker a peace agreement. This statement reflected a desire within the alliance to present a united front and to quickly de-escalate a conflict that threatened to destabilize a critical region. Russia and China, two global powers with significant strategic and economic ties to Iran, responded with carefully worded statements that balanced their own interests. Russian President Vladimir Putin placed a call to President Trump, offering to assist in managing the situation. This move was classic Putin diplomacy, positioning Moscow not as an adversary, but as an indispensable and constructive partner in global crisis management, thereby asserting Russia's continued relevance on the world stage. China, a major consumer of Iranian oil, issued a public call for a lasting ceasefire and the avoidance of further escalation. At the same time, Beijing made a point to reaffirm its friendly ties with Tehran, signaling that the American military action would not sever its long-standing relationship with Iran. Within the Middle East itself, the reaction was predictably polarized. Qatar emerged as a crucial diplomatic player, leveraging its unique position of maintaining good relations with both Iran and the United States. The Qatari Prime Minister was instrumental in securing Tehran's agreement to the ceasefire terms, a role that was publicly acknowledged by Iran's envoy to the United Nations. This shuttle diplomacy underscored Qatar's growing influence as a key mediator in regional disputes. On the other side of the Gulf, traditional American allies like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates remained largely silent in public, but were undoubtedly relieved in private by the blow dealt to their primary regional rival Iran. The diplomatic aftermath at the United Nations was a microcosm of these broader global dynamics. Both the Iranian and Israeli ambassadors thanked the key mediators, with Iran's representative acknowledging Qatar's efforts and Israel's praising the United States. Yet, the underlying tensions remained palpable. The American action, undertaken without a UN Security Council resolution, raised familiar questions about the legality of unilateral military force. While the immediate crisis was contained by the ceasefire, the fundamental disagreements and power struggles that fueled the conflict were left unresolved, simmering just beneath the surface of a fragile, diplomatically enforced calm. The world watched, waiting to see which power would make the next move on the board. While politicians and generals debated the strategic outcomes of Operation Midnight Hammer, the human cost of the preceding conflict was mounting, leaving a trail of death and devastation that extended far beyond the targeted nuclear sites. The 12-day exchange of fire between Israel and Iran had inflicted a grim toll on civilian populations. In Iran, the pain was felt acutely in the northern Gilan province. Israeli retaliatory strikes on June 24, aimed at military targets, reportedly struck residential buildings, killing at least 16 people and wounding 33 more. These casualties brought the brutal reality of the conflict into Iranian homes, transforming a distant geopolitical struggle into a source of personal grief and loss for ordinary families. The ripple effects of the Israel-Iran conflict were also felt with devastating force in the Gaza Strip. As Israel's military machine pivoted to confront the threat from Iran, its operations in the long-suffering Palestinian territory intensified dramatically. According to reports from health officials in Gaza, in the period since Israel's bombardment of Iran began on June 13, over 860 people were killed by Israeli fire. This staggering number of casualties, occurring in the shadow of a larger regional confrontation, served as a tragic reminder of how localized conflicts can become horrifically magnified when the attention of the world and the region's major powers is focused elsewhere, leaving vulnerable populations to bear the brunt of the violence. The fallout from the strikes also created security reverberations within the United States itself. In the week following the attacks on Iran, federal law enforcement agencies moved to address concerns about potential retaliatory actions on American soil. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement conducted a series of targeted operations, arresting 130 Iranian nationals across the country. The official justification for these arrests was a concern over potential sleeper cells and individuals with suspected ties to hostile foreign entities, specifically the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This domestic security crackdown highlighted the administration's fear that the conflict could spill over America's borders, creating a climate of suspicion and anxiety for Iranian American communities. This human toll serves as a sobering counterpoint to the clean, sanitized language of strategic strikes and geopolitical victories. The conflict was not a bloodless affair conducted solely between military assets. It was a violent eruption that claimed lives, destroyed homes, and sowed fear across multiple countries. From the grieving families in Gilan province to the overwhelmed hospitals in Gaza and the anxious Iranian communities in the United States, the real price of this confrontation was paid not by governments or armies, but by ordinary people caught in the crossfire of a struggle far beyond their control. Their stories are an essential and often overlooked part of what really happened. In the immediate aftermath of the American airstrikes, the focus shifted rapidly from military confrontation to precarious diplomacy. The ceasefire, announced by President Trump and brokered with the critical assistance of Qatar, went into effect just 12 hours after the bombs fell. As of today, June 26, 2025, this fragile truce is holding, but it is a peace maintained under immense pressure, with all sides watching each other with deep suspicion. Both Israel and Iran have publicly committed to upholding the ceasefire, but each has qualified its commitment with the condition that it will only do so as long as the other side does the same. This reciprocal threat has created a tense standoff where any perceived misstep could reignite the conflict. The first few days of the ceasefire have already been tested by a war of words and accusations. Both Israeli and Iranian officials have accused the other of minor violations and provocative actions, though neither side has chosen to escalate these claims into renewed military action. These mutual recriminations highlight the profound lack of trust that underpins the current calm. The truce does not represent a resolution of the underlying issues. Rather, it is a temporary pause, a collective step back from the abyss. The long-term viability of this ceasefire remains highly uncertain, dependent on the political calculations being made in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran, and the ever-present risk of an unplanned incident spiraling out of control. The diplomatic landscape that has emerged is complex and fraught with potential pitfalls. President Trump, having positioned himself as the ultimate dealmaker, has announced his intention to pursue direct talks with Iranian officials. The stated goal of these future negotiations is to formalize a new, more comprehensive agreement that would permanently prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. This prospect of direct U.S.-Iran talks is a significant development, but it is also one that faces enormous obstacles. Decades of animosity, deep-seated ideological differences, and the fresh wounds of the recent conflict will make any genuine rapprochement incredibly difficult to achieve. The success or failure of this diplomatic initiative will likely define the next chapter of this ongoing saga. For now, the region exists in a state of suspended animation. The guns have fallen silent, but the specter of war has not receded. The ceasefire has provided a crucial, if temporary, reprieve from violence, allowing space for diplomacy to work. However, it is a peace built on a foundation of threats and coercion, rather than mutual understanding or reconciliation. The international community, while relieved by the cessation of hostilities, remains on high alert. The path forward is narrow and treacherous, and the question on every diplomat's mind is whether this ceasefire is the beginning of a genuine peace process or merely a brief intermission in a long and destructive war. While the international community grappled with the implications of the strikes, the political fallout within the United States began to create significant tremors in Washington. The Trump administration's handling of the crisis, particularly its communication with Congress, quickly became a point of major contention. In a move that drew bipartisan criticism, the White House initially postponed classified briefings for lawmakers on the details of Operation Midnight Hammer and the intelligence that precipitated it. This information blackout left members of Congress in the dark at a critical moment, fueling frustration and suspicion on Capitol Hill about the administration's motives and the full extent of the military engagement with Iran. The lack of transparency angered members from both sides of the aisle. Democrats, many of whom were already skeptical of the president's aggressive foreign policy, expressed deep frustration over being sidelined during a major military action that could have led to a full-scale war. More surprisingly, some Republicans also voiced their discontent. Representative Thomas Massie, a libertarian-leaning Republican known for his non-interventionist stance, publicly criticized the administration for withholding information from the legislative branch, which holds the constitutional power to declare war. The White House eventually relented under the mounting pressure, scheduling the now-delayed briefings for June 26th and 27th, but the initial secrecy had already damaged trust. The political debate also extended to the American public, where the president's decision to launch the airstrikes proved to be highly divisive. A poll conducted by CNN in the days following the operation found that the military action was broadly unpopular with the American people. This sentiment reflects a general war weariness among the populace and a deep-seated apprehension about becoming entangled in another prolonged conflict in the Middle East. The poll numbers presented a significant political challenge for the president, suggesting that his portrayal of the strikes as a resounding success had not fully convinced a skeptical public, which remained wary of the potential for further escalation and the human and financial costs that would entail. This domestic political environment adds another layer of complexity to the administration's strategy moving forward. With a divided public and a restive Congress, the president's latitude for future military action against Iran may be more constrained than he would prefer. The upcoming congressional briefings are likely to be contentious affairs, with lawmakers pressing for answers not only about the effectiveness of the strikes but also about the legal justification for the action and the long-term plan for the region. The political battles being fought in Washington will be just as crucial in determining the ultimate outcome of this crisis as the diplomatic negotiations and military posturing taking place thousands of miles away. As the dust begins to settle over the shattered facilities at Fordow and Natanz, the conflict between the United States and Iran has entered a new and profoundly uncertain phase. The immediate crisis has been averted by a fragile ceasefire, but the core issues that fueled the confrontation remain dangerously unresolved. The world has stepped back from the brink of a major regional war, but the path forward is shrouded in ambiguity and fraught with risk. The competing narratives of victory and defiance from Washington and Tehran have created a distorted reality, making it difficult to assess the true strategic landscape. What is clear is that the region has been fundamentally altered, and the consequences of Operation Midnight Hammer will continue to unfold for months, if not years, to come. The most immediate question revolves around the durability of the ceasefire and the prospect of genuine diplomatic progress. President Trump's stated intention to negotiate a new nuclear deal directly with Iran represents a potential, if narrow, off-ramp from the cycle of escalation. However, the success of any such negotiation is far from guaranteed. It will require a level of trust and compromise that seems almost unimaginable in the current climate of hostility and suspicion. The conflicting intelligence assessments regarding the damage to Iran's nuclear program will also play a crucial role. If Tehran believes its program remains largely viable, its incentive to make significant concessions at the negotiating table will be greatly diminished. The humanitarian impact of the conflict serves as a stark and tragic reminder of the real-world cost of these geopolitical struggles. The civilian casualties in Iran and the catastrophic loss of life in Gaza underscore the devastating ripple effects of state-level violence. These human tragedies risk being forgotten as the world's attention shifts to high-level diplomacy and strategic analysis, but they form the bitter foundation upon which any lasting peace must be built. Furthermore, the security crackdowns and arrests within the U.S. highlight how international conflicts can erode civil liberties and foster climates of fear and suspicion at home, a toxic side effect of modern warfare. Ultimately, the events of the past few weeks have left the Middle East and the world in a more precarious position. While the administration may claim a decisive victory, the reality appears to be far more complex. A temporary tactical setback for Iran has been achieved at the cost of heightened regional tensions and the very real risk of a future miscalculation leading to a far wider war. The current calm is not peace, it is a pause. The coming weeks will be critical in determining whether this pause can be transformed into a genuine opportunity for de-escalation and diplomacy, or if it is merely the quiet before an even more violent storm.